in the late 1950s. Abdul Duke Fakir, the last surviving member of beloved Motown group The Four Tops, has passed away at the age of 88. He died at his home in Detroit from heart failure, his family confirmed on Monday. The Four Tops became one of the best-known bands of the Motown era after forming in the late 1950s. The group is known for classic hits such as Reach Out, I'll Be There, Baby I Need Your Loving and I Can't Help Myself, Sugar Pie Honey Bunch. Our hearts are heavy as we mourn the loss of a trailblazer, icon and music legend who, through his 70-year music career, touched the lives of so many as he continued to tour until the end of 2023 and officially retired this year, his family said in a statement. As the last living founding member of the iconic The Four Tops music group, we find solace in Duke's legacy living on through his music for generations to come. The four members of the group, Fakir, Levi Stubbs, Ronaldo Obi Benson, and Lawrence Payton, formed in the late 1950s, but did not find success until the early 1960s. They continued to play together as a group until Payton's death in 1997. Benson and Stubbs died in 2005 and 2008, respectively. When they were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1990, artist Stevie Wonder praised their skills. The things I love about them the most, they are very professional, they have fun with what they do, they are very loving, they have always been gentlemen, he said. Fakir, the child of Ethiopian and Bangladeshi immigrants, lived in Detroit his entire life and grew up in a dangerous neighborhood there, according to the Associated Press. Once we started singing, our whole perspective of life changed, Fakir said in a 2022 interview with the Detroit News. We just started looking at the beauty of life and traveling and being able to sing to the world and making people happy. Speaking to the Detroit Free Press, singer Smokey Robinson addressed the death of his longtime friend. My brother, I really hate to have to say goodbye, but you've been called home by the Father to once again join Lawrence, Obi and Levi and make more of the heavenly music you guys made while here, Robinson said. I'm going to miss you, my brother. In 2022, Fakir released a memoir, I'll Be There, My Life with the Four Tops. He is survived by his wife, 6 children, 13 grandchildren, and 9 great-grandchildren. Illinois police have released body cam footage that shows the chaotic moments that led to the fatal shooting of a woman who had called 911 to report a suspected intruder at her home. The killing of Sonia Massey, 36, over Independence Day weekend has led to criminal charges against one of the officers who responded to her home and has drawn condemnation from President Joe Biden. Sangamon County Sheriff's Deputy Sean Grayson has been fired from the police force and charged with murder and official misconduct. He has pleaded not guilty to the charges. On Monday, Illinois State Police released body cam footage that shows the officers shouting at Miss Massey to put down a pot of boiling water as they point their pistols at her. The incident in the early hours of the 6th of July began when Miss Massey called police to her home in Springfield, 200 miles, 320 kilometers, south of Chicago, to report that she believed someone had broken into her property. Deputies followed her inside when Ms. Massey entered her home and watched as she searched for her identification. In the video, Mr. Grayson sees a pot sitting on a stove, gestures towards it and says, "We don't need a fire while we're here." Ms. Massey walks to the stove to remove the pot. She and Mr. Grayson appear to laugh over her pot of steaming hot water before she twice says, "I rebuke you in the name of Jesus." You better expletive, not, or I swear to God I'll expletive, shoot you in your expletive face, Mr. Grayson says. He then draws his pistol as he shouts for her to drop the pot. "Okay, I'm sorry," Miss Massey is heard saying before she ducks. After shooting her, the officer says, "What else do we do? I'm not taking hot expletive, boiling water to the expletive face." On Monday, the Sangamon County State's Attorney's Office said Mr. Grayson was not justified in his use of force on Miss Massey. In a statement, President Biden said he was heartbroken for her family. Sonia Massey, a beloved mother, friend, daughter, and young black woman, should be alive today, he said. Sonia's death at the hands of a responding officer reminds us that all too often black Americans face fears for their safety in ways many of the rest of us do not. Lawyers for Miss Massey's family have commended prosecutors for their swift action against Mr. Grayson. Lawyer Benjamin Crump said the footage is going to shock the conscience of America. It is that senseless, that unnecessary, that unjustifiable, that unconstitutional, he said. Vice President Kamala Harris has attracted the support of enough Democratic delegates to become the party's nominee for president, the BBC's US partner CBS News reports. A survey by the Associated Press on Monday evening said Ms. Harris had received the endorsement of more than the 1,976 delegates needed to win the nomination in the first round of voting. Ms. Harris said she was proud to have secured broad support and looked forward to formally accepting the nomination. Delegates are people who are selected to represent their electoral area at the Democratic National Convention, DNC, the party's key nominating event. Such endorsements are non-binding, but if the total holds between now and when delegates cast their votes, scheduled to take place from the 7th of August, Ms. Harris would formally clinch the party's nomination. Delegations from at least 27 states have issued statements of their full delegations supporting Ms. Harris, according to CBS. The survey is an indication of the groundswell of support for Ms. Harris after President Joe Biden dropped out of the race on Sunday. Since Mr. Biden's announcement, millions of dollars in donations have poured into her campaign, and leading Democrats have lined up to support her bid as the Democratic nominee. Speaking to staff at her campaign's headquarters in Wilmington, Delaware, on Monday evening, Ms. Harris told campaign staff, "We have 106 days until Election Day, and in that time, we have some hard work to do." Ms. Harris took the team through her vision of the country and the views that she says separate this campaign from Trump's, saying she would gladly put her record up against his. "Our campaign has always been about two different versions of what we see as the future of our country," she said. "One focuses on the future, the other focuses on the past. Donald Trump wants to take our country backwards. We believe in a brighter future that makes room for all Americans." She also noted Mr. Biden's accomplishments, saying her time serving as his vice president was one of the greatest honors of my life. Ms. Harris noted the roller coaster of mixed emotions they've all been on because I love Joe Biden, and I know we all do. She promised she'd work hard to earn the nomination for president and unite both Democrats and the country as a whole. Before Ms. Harris took to the stage, Mr. Biden made his first comments since dropping out of the 2024 election via phone call while isolating after contracting COVID-19. He thanked aides and told them to embrace Ms. Harris because she's the best. "I know yesterday's news was surprising and hard for you to hear, but it was the right thing to do," Mr. Biden told them. He acknowledged the team had poured their heart and soul into helping him stay in office for a second term, but said, "I'm not going anywhere," and vowed to remain fully engaged in the campaign. "I'm hoping you'll give every bit of your heart and soul that you gave to me to Kamala," Mr. Biden told them. "We still need to save this democracy," he said. "Trump is still a danger to this nation." Mr. Biden is due to return to the White House on Tuesday afternoon after self-isolating in Delaware. The path for Vice President Kamala Harris to secure the Democratic presidential nomination is clearing. That may end up being the easy part. The most formidable challenge defeating Republican nominee Donald Trump in November is still to come. Her elevation to the top of ticket would bring new strengths for the Democrats, but it also exposes weaknesses that were less of a concern with Mr. Biden. According to recent polls, Ms. Harris trails the former president slightly, a roughly similar position to the one Mr. Biden found himself in before his historic announcement. But there may be more room for those numbers to shift as we move from a hypothetical matchup to a very real one. For at least a moment, Democrats have a jolt of energy after more than 3 weeks of intense hand-wringing over the president's fitness and ability to sustain his campaign. All of Ms. Harris's leading potential rivals for the nomination have endorsed her, as has former Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, who remains one of the most influential players in Democratic politics. This is, still, shaping up to be a tight race in November, a condition that reflects deep partisan trenches in American politics and the distaste many voters have for Trump as a candidate. The vice president's primary challenge and opportunity will be to capitalize on this Trump aversion, attract centrist voters in key swing states, and energize the Democratic base, which was in the past few weeks swinging towards despair, to match the enthusiasm many on the right hold for the former president. A reset. This renewed sense of Democratic presidential enthusiasm comes with a dollar sign attached. According to the Harris campaign, the vice president raised more than $80 million, £62 million, in new donations in the 24 hours since Mr. Biden's at the biggest one-day total of any candidate this election cycle. That, along with the nearly $100 million she inherits from the Biden-Harris fundraising coffers, gives her a firm financial footing for the campaign to come. Ms. Harris, if she becomes the nominee, also diffuses one of the most effective attacks the Republicans have leveled against their opponent, his age. For months, the Trump campaign has been pounding Mr. Biden for being feeble and easily confused, characterizations that were reinforced for many Americans after the president's halting debate performance 4 weeks ago. The vice president at age 59 will be a more energetic campaigner and able to make a more coherent case for her party. She could also turn the 78-year-old Trump's age against him, as he would become the oldest person ever elected president. Ms. Harris may also be able to shore up support from black voters, who polls indicate had been drifting away from Mr. Biden in recent months. If she can combine that with more backing from other minorities and younger voters, Barack Obama's winning coalition from 2008 and 2012, it could help her gain ground against Trump in the handful of swing states that will decide this year's election. Her background as a prosecutor could also burnish tough-on-crime credentials. While her law enforcement resume was a liability when she ran for the Democratic presidential nomination in 2019 and led to derisive "Kamala is a cop" attacks from the left, it could help her in a campaign against Trump. The vice president has also been the administration's point person on abortion, which has proven to be one of the most potent issues for motivating the Democratic base in recent elections. Mr. Biden, by contrast, sometimes had been a reluctant advocate on the issue, hampered by a past record of supporting some limits on the procedure. I think she reminds suburban women across the country, particularly in those battleground states, of what's at stake with reproductive rights. Former New York Congressman Steve Israel, who headed the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, told the BBC's Americast podcast. "We have established a fundamental reset in the campaign. Harris's vulnerabilities. For all Harris's potential strengths, there is a reason why some Democrats were initially reluctant to push Mr. Biden to step aside, given that his running mate would be the clear successor." Despite generating Democratic enthusiasm on the subject of abortion, Ms. Harris's record as vice president has been mixed. Early in the administration, she was set the task of addressing the root causes of the migration crisis at the US-Mexico border. A number of missteps and misstatements, including a ham-handed June 2021 interview with NBC News presenter Lester Holt, damaged her standing and opened her to conservative attacks. Republicans are already condemning her as the president's border czar, attempting to make her the face of what public opinion polls have found is the Biden administration's unpopular immigration policies. Immigration is a soft spot for Democrats in those battleground areas, Mr. Israel said. This is a very salient issue for voters living in those suburbs, fairly or unfairly. They believe that our immigration system is not managed strongly enough. The Trump campaign will also try to turn the vice president's prosecutorial background against her, both by highlighting the former president's record of enacting criminal justice reform and by attacking her past prosecutorial and parole decisions. Another Harris vulnerability is her checkered track record as a candidate. In her 2016 Senate bid, she faced only token opposition from Republicans in deeply Democratic California. Her one solo run for national office, a bid for the 2020 Democratic presidential nomination, ended in ruins. While she surged early, a combination of fumbled interviews, a lack of clearly defined vision, and a poorly managed campaign led her to drop out before even the earliest primary contests. First impressions. Perhaps the biggest challenge for Ms. Harris is that, unlike the president, she is not the incumbent. While she might have the opportunity to distance herself from some of the more unpopular elements of Mr. Biden's record, she also does not have the luxury of being a known quantity for voters. Expect a furious effort by Republicans to paint Ms. Harris as too untested and too risky to be president. In effect, Trump now has a greater claim to being the only proven commodity. The vice president has a chance, in the days ahead, to make a new first impression with the American public. If she stumbles out of the gate, it could open the door to an extended power struggle that stretches into the Democrats' national convention in late August. They could end up with the party uniting behind a different candidate or tearing itself apart. As the past 4 weeks have shown, fortunes in the White House race can shift quickly and permanently. Ms. Harris has punched her ticket to the biggest stage in American politics. Now she has to show she can compete. Democrats have poured $81 million, £62 million, in donations into Vice President Kamala Harris's presidential campaign since President Joe Biden dropped out of the race on Sunday. It is the largest 24-hour period of campaign funding in presidential history, with more than 888,000 donors making contributions of less than $200 in the day after Mr. Biden stepped aside. Grassroots supporters are energized and excited to support her as the Democratic nominee. Act Blue, the progressive donation platform, said on X. Donors who had pulled back their funding over concerns about Mr. Biden's age say they now intend to resume their support for the party. The party raised over $27.5 million in the first 5 hours of Ms. Harris's presidential campaign. That number nearly doubled by the end of the day. In 24 hours, the sum broke a presidential fundraising record. The surge in donations in the last 24 hours is the single biggest for online contributions to Democrats since 2020, according to the New York Times, when Act Blue raised $73.5 million after the death of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. The new funds mark a significant turn for the Democratic Party, which had seen support erode from major donors after Mr. Biden's poor performance in June's presidential debate against Donald Trump. Grassroots funding from small donors had also diminished, according to Biden campaign insiders cited in U.S. media. But soon after Mr. Biden's announcement to drop out of the race and his endorsement of Ms. Harris's bid for the White House, Democrats went online to contribute at a startling pace. Win with Black Women, a group of Black women leaders, held a Zoom call with more than 44,000 participants on Sunday night to throw their support behind the vice president. The group says it raised over $1.5 million in 3 hours for her presidential campaign. Joe Cotchett, a San Francisco-based political fundraiser for the Democrats, told NBC News that donors are now ready to dig into their pockets. Among them is Gideon Stein, president of the Mariah Fund and a donor for the party, who told the U.S. news outlet that he will resume his funding after having paused it because of concerns over Mr. Biden's electability. Several high-profile political donors have also indicated their support for Ms. Harris as the Democratic Party nominee. Reid Hoffman, the co-founder of LinkedIn, called the vice president the right person at the right time. I wholeheartedly support Kamala Harris and her candidacy for President of the United States in our fight for democracy in November, he said in a post on X. Another big-name political donor, Alexander Soros, the son of philanthropist George Soros, said Ms. Harris is the best and most qualified candidate we have. But others, like entrepreneur and investor Vinod Khosla, called for an open process at the convention and not a coronation. The key still is who can best beat Trump above all other priorities, he wrote on X. Netflix co-founder Reed Hastings, known to be a Democratic mega-donor, previously told the New York Times Biden should step down as the Democratic Party nominee. Dem delegates need to pick a swing state winner, he wrote on X on Sunday, following Mr. Biden's announcement. Both Democratic and Republican lawmakers called on Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheatle to step down in the wake of the assassination attempt of Donald Trump. The demand came during and after a tense House Oversight Committee hearing on Monday that questioned Ms. Cheatle about her agency's security preparations ahead of a 13th of July rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, that led to the attempt on Trump's life. The shooting left one person dead and 3 others wounded, including the former president. Monday's hearing was bruising for Ms. Cheatle, as lawmakers ridiculed her answers and the lack of information the agency had made public, but it was also a rare show of bipartisanship on an increasingly polarized Capitol Hill. For nearly 6 hours, members sought to answer lingering questions about the shooting, including how suspect Thomas Matthew Crooks was able to get onto a nearby rooftop and why Trump was allowed to take the stage even after a suspicious person had been reported. After the hearing, the leading Republican and Democrat from the committee, James Comer and Jamie Raskin, sent a letter to Ms. Cheatle that concretely laid out their belief that she should vacate her office. In the middle of a presidential election, the committee and the American people demand serious institutional accountability and transparency that you are not providing, the letter says. We call on you to resign as director as a first step to allowing new leadership to swiftly address this crisis and rebuild the trust of a truly concerned Congress and the American people. While Ms. Cheatle took responsibility during the hearing for the security lapses and acknowledged that the Butler incident marked the most significant operational failure of the Secret Service in decades, she left many lawmakers frustrated. Ms. Cheatle pushed back on calls to resign and said she remained the best person to lead the Secret Service at this time. The Secret Service director also answered few questions directly, citing the ongoing investigation. The American people have questions, and they deserve answers, Oversight Committee Chairman Mr. Comer told Ms. Cheatle. You were required to provide answers and ma'am, you did not. At times, the tense hearing on Monday seemed to devolve into fury. Lawmakers used expletives, shouted at the witness, and questioned the director's honesty and competence. I'm disgusted by your performance, Florida Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna said. Ms. Cheatle's answers seemed to continuously spark the ire of lawmakers on the committee, many of whom said she should be dismissed if she continued to refuse to resign. It looks like you won't answer some pretty basic questions, Ohio Republican Jim Jordan, a Trump ally, said. And it looks like you cut corners when it comes to protecting one of the most well-known individuals on the planet. Throughout the hearing, some representatives groaned loudly, rolled their eyes, or muttered audibly in response to Ms. Cheatle's comments. In one of the tensest moments of the hearing, South Carolina Republican Nancy Mace uttered a string of expletives in response to another one of Ms. Cheatle's answers, specifically about how her opening remarks were leaked to U.S. media outlets over the weekend. You are being dishonest or lying, Ms. Mace said. You're just dodging. She later filed a congressional motion to impeach Ms. Cheatle to force her out of the job. Another Republican, Georgia's Marjorie Taylor Greene, shouted at Ms. Cheatle, referring to her as a total failure. The entire country is demanding you resign, Ms. Greene said. Ms. Cheatle also acknowledged that, to date, no Secret Service officers or employees have been disciplined for what took place in Butler. According to Ms. Cheatle, a preliminary report on the shooting will be released in the next 60 days, a timeline that committee members scoffed at. New York's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a Democrat, said that the delay of such a report during a tense election season was not acceptable. This is not theater. This is not about jockeying. This is about the safety of some of the most highly targeted and valued targets internationally and domestically, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez said. There needs to be answers. We need to make policy decisions. Without that, we're flying blind, she added. Despite the relative show of unity regarding Ms. Cheatle's future, there were some points of disagreement between Republicans and Democrats on the committee. Several Republicans, for example, characterized Ms. Cheatle as a DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, hire and questioned whether female agents assigned to Trump's security detail were able to do the job properly. Others, such as Colorado's Lauren Boebert and Ms. Luna of Florida, hinted at conspiracy theories that have appeared online. Florida Republican Michael Waltz blamed Ms. Cheatle for the rumors, arguing that misinformation flies in the absence of information. "I would have fired you just by how you handled this," Mr. Waltz said, "because you should have been the first to the mics." Several eyewitnesses to the shooting in Butler told the BBC that Ms. Cheatle's answers left them feeling frustrated and angry. "She's trying to pass the buck," said John Vincent, a Butler resident. "I'm actually amazed at how insufficient her answers were. She needs to be held accountable for her total lack of competency. She put our lives at risk and needs to take responsibility." Another witness, former U.S. Marine Teresa Wilson, said that while she understands that there are active investigations still taking place, Ms. Cheatle was far too evasive. "The only acceptable thing she could have done is take responsibility and step down," Ms. Wilson said. "All the rest is noise." About 240 million people are eligible to vote in this year's U.S. election, but only a relatively small number of them are likely to settle the question of who becomes the next president. Experts believe there are only a handful of states that could plausibly be won by either the Democratic candidate or his Republican predecessor, Donald Trump. 6 of them, Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, appear to be on a knife edge and probably hold the key to who will take the White House. So both parties are campaigning intensively to win over undecided voters in these states. Arizona. Mr. Biden gained the presidency in 2020 with the support of the Grand Canyon state, which narrowly voted to back a Democratic candidate for the first time since the 1990s. This state borders Mexico for hundreds of miles and has become a focal point of the nation's immigration debate. Arrivals at the U.S. border have hit record highs while Mr. Biden has been in office, presenting him with a major electoral headache. Border crossings have fallen in recent months, but he has toughened his stance and made plans to enact border shutdowns when crossings surge. Mr. Trump has repeatedly attacked his rival's record on immigration and has vowed to carry out the largest deportation operation in U.S. history if he regains the presidency. Arizona has also hosted a bitter row over abortion access after state Republicans attempted to reinstate a 160-year-old near-total ban on terminating pregnancies. It's become an explosive issue nationwide since 2022, when the U.S. Supreme Court overturned a landmark ruling that gave women the constitutional right to abortion. Georgia. Our list of swing states closely matches the list of places in which Trump-backed Republican officials tried to thwart Mr. Biden's win in the 2020 election. In Georgia, alleged election interference has landed Mr. Trump in one of his 4 criminal cases. He and 18 others are accused of conspiring to overturn his narrow defeat to Mr. Biden in the state. He denies any wrongdoing, and the case looks increasingly unlikely to be heard in court before the election. At any rate, it remains to be seen whether Mr. Trump's legal headaches will harm him at the ballot box. We may find out soon, now that his hush money trial has ended with a guilty verdict. At 33%, Georgia has one of the country's highest proportions of African Americans in its population, and it is believed that this demographic was instrumental in Mr. Biden flipping the state in 2020. However, disillusionment has been reported among America's black voters, with some saying not enough has been done to combat racial injustice or deliver on the economy. Michigan. The Great Lakes state has picked the winning presidential candidate in the last 2 elections. Despite backing Mr. Biden in 2020, it has become symbolic of a nationwide backlash over the president's support for Israel during that country's war in Gaza. During Michigan's Democratic primary contest in February, more than 100,000 voters chose the uncommitted option on their ballots after a campaign was mounted by activists who want the U.S. government to back a ceasefire in Gaza and to halt its military aid to Israel. Notably, Michigan has the country's largest proportion of Arab Americans, a demographic whose support for Mr. Biden looks to be in jeopardy. Mr. Trump has highlighted the state's significance in his potential path to victory. Commenting on events in the Middle East, he has called on Israel to finish its campaign over Hamas in Gaza, but get it over with fast. Nevada. The Silver State has voted Democrat for the last several elections, but there are signs of a possible turnaround by the Republicans. Recent averages published by poll tracking firm 538 indicate that Mr. Trump has been enjoying a healthy lead over Mr. Biden there. Both men are vying to win the state's sizable Latino population. Despite the fact that the U.S. economy has shown strong growth and jobs creation since Mr. Biden took the presidency, the post-COVID recovery has been slower in Nevada than elsewhere. At 5.1%, the state has the highest unemployment rate in the country, after California and the District of Columbia, according to the latest U.S. government statistics. If Mr. Trump wins power again, he has vowed a return to an agenda of lower taxes across the board and fewer regulations. Pennsylvania. Pennsylvanians are far from unique among Americans for feeling cost-of-living pressures as a result of inflation. But the price of groceries has risen faster in their state than in any other, according to market intelligence provider Datassembly. The BBC recently reported on how people were struggling to cope in Erie, a bellwether county for the rest of Pennsylvania, where as many as 1 in 8 people are considered food insecure. The state proved pivotal in the 2020 election, backing Mr. Biden in his successful White House bid. He has a deep emotional connection to the working-class city of Scranton, where he grew up. High inflation could hurt Mr. Biden across the U.S., as polling suggests it is giving voters an unfavorable view of the economy. Mr. Trump has sought to attack his adversary over persistently high prices, but he has his own challenges in Pennsylvania after a relatively strong showing there by his Republican primary rival, Nikki Haley. Wisconsin. The Badger State also picked the winning presidential candidate in both 2016 and 2020 by a margin of little more than 20,000 votes each time. Pundits have suggested it is in marginal states like these where an impact could be made by third-party candidates who are campaigning against the policies of the big two candidates. Polling has indicated that a sizable show of support for an independent such as Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is fighting to get on the ballot in Wisconsin and other states, could harm the vote tallies for Mr. Biden or Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump has described that state as really important. If we win Wisconsin, we win the whole thing. The summer Republican National Convention will be held in the city of Milwaukee. Mr. Biden recently pointed to a new Microsoft data center heading to Wisconsin as evidence of how he was delivering new jobs, arguing that his predecessor had been unable to deliver on his pledges. Pressure had been building on U.S. President Biden for weeks, but still his Sunday afternoon announcement that he was ending his re-election campaign came as a shock. The conversation moved quickly, however, onto what happens next, and especially who will replace him as the Democratic Party's candidate to face Donald Trump. We asked Democratic voters, and one Republican still not convinced he can back Trump, what they made of Mr. Biden's historic decision, as well as his endorsement of Kamala Harris, his current vice president. We start with a voter who is excited about the news. Anna Bosking, age 22 from Iowa, Democratic Party. Anna was going to vote Democratic whoever the nominee was, but says she excited to back Kamala Harris. I was hoping Joe Biden would do this and was kind of expecting it today. I think he did what was right for the country, and it was a selfless act. I wanted to see a younger candidate all along. I think Joe Biden has been a wonderful candidate, but he's been declining, and asking him to serve another 4 years was asking a lot. Endorsing Harris was the right move and moves the party toward being united. I think Kamala will be a great candidate. I'm excited to see her debate, and I think this brings energy back to the Democratic Party. Who she picks as her vice presidential candidate needs to get people excited about this campaign. I would love to see 2 women on the ticket, but that would be hard, just because that's the way it is. Realistically, there needs to be a man from a swing state. Anyone who is saying this isn't a democratic process is wrong. People who voted for Joe Biden voted for Kamala Harris. Picking someone else at this point would be less democratic. Matthew Henderson, age 25 from Indiana Democratic Party. Matthew says it's sad to see Biden drop out, but he thinks it gives Democrats a better shot in November's election. My hesitancy about replacing Biden still remains, but it's been lessened by the outpouring of support for Harris as the nominee. I think that there's still a risk that a challenge to her before or at the convention could divide the Democratic Party. There's not ample time to build support like in a typical campaign, so right now the only person who can take the existing support and run with it is Vice President Harris. I'm not certain who she'll pick as a running mate, but I'm sure she'll pick a straight white man from a swing state or district. Maybe Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, Arizona Senator Mark Kelly, or Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker. Those are some good contenders. I just don't see another woman being added to the ticket at this time. Sylvia Holt, age 45, from Oregon, Democratic Party. Sylvia is hopeful that with Harris atop the ticket, reproductive freedoms will be protected from a second Trump term. In the beginning, I was shocked, and then I started thinking, what's going to happen now? What's the process? How do we shift to another candidate? When Biden endorsed Vice President Harris, I immediately was thinking, who can be her running mate in order for this to not be focused on her being a woman? I was thinking we need to have a strong vice president pick from the Midwest. I did like Governor Gretchen Whitmer as a vice presidential pick, but I think 2 women will too much for people. I really like what she's doing, but I'm leaning towards Governor Shapiro. He's right there, and from what I've seen, he's really popular in the Midwest, and we really need that in November. We just need strong candidates because for me now, it's not about who is running, but who can win. Women's reproductive rights are the #1 priority for me, and I feel better about that issue because Vice President Harris is atop the ticket. This is a chance that we can't lose. We really need to come together as a party and support who is running against Donald Trump. We don't need him again. Jim Sullivan, age 54, from Indiana, Republican Party. Jim, a lifelong Republican, was struggling to support Trump again after the former president's criminal conviction. How will Biden's decision influence his vote? When I first heard Biden was stepping down, I thought this is long overdue. But the fact that Biden won't step down as president altogether means this decision isn't looking out for the interests of the country. This is looking out for who can win the election. He should have passed the baton to whoever and let the party pick. I will never vote for Kamala Harris. I don't think she's qualified. There's no way. I don't think she's capable. I feel like Trump is trending really strongly, and I think he's going to win the election with a very strong margin, electorally, and probably even popular vote too. The assassination attempt changed things a lot. He just demonstrated a key quality of someone who can be courageous. He demonstrated that quality when he put his fist in the air. I'm gravitating toward Trump now. I really have a hard time saying I'd vote for a Democrat. Shana Ziolko, age 39, from Missouri, Democratic Party. Shana was eating dinner when we called and broke the news about Biden dropping out. She wants an open convention to pick his replacement. This actually gives me a more positive feeling because I feel like a different candidate is going to be more viable against Trump. This is a positive thing. It's late in the race, but it's positive. I'm going to put my support behind whoever they put forward. This is a time for the Democratic Party to unite. Whoever the vice presidential and presidential candidates are, we back them as soon as we can and provide them as much support as possible. An open convention would be best way to pick who the candidates are, because I'm not sure Kamala Harris is going to be as strong as a presidential candidate. I think there are probably people who would be stronger than her to come forward. Isaiah Reeves, age 28, from Tennessee, Democratic Party. Isaiah is happy to see change at the top the Democratic ticket, but thinks it may have come too late to beat Trump. I feel good about it, and hopefully the party coalesces around Harris in a relatively quick manner, and we go on to face the election. And this is a decision that should have been made a year ago, if not longer. That was pretty much my hesitation with pushing Biden out, in that it just feels a little bit too late in the process. Logistically, I don't think we can handle a contested primary. Even though Harris is not my #1 preferred candidate, I think she's fine. I'd be surprised if any candidate won against Trump, whether it be Biden, Harris, or insert Democrat here. But I think she gives us a slightly better chance because she's an objectively better candidate. I think it's a good decision. I'm glad he stepped down, but again it just feels like poor planning on the Democratic Party's part. They're always running around like a chicken with their head cut off. It doesn't scream party cohesion, but I think it's the best path forward. Jessica Altobelli, Age, 33, from Pennsylvania, Democratic Party. This voter is excited about the prospective of a Harris presidency and wants to see her state's governor on the ticket too. I was shocked, but I also knew it was going to happen based on how many senators and congresspeople were encouraging him to drop out. It's exciting, and then it was really special to see the way people were reacting to the news and really honoring his decision. And I felt relief that I no longer needed to feel angry at Joe Biden for staying in the race. I am pretty enthusiastic about Kamala Harris. It seems there is a lot of support in the party for her, and it is nice to see the party come together over a decision when we don't have a lot of time to waste. Nobody knows who is our best chance to win against Trump, though of course I'm worried Kamala Harris can't beat Trump. I'd be equally as worried about any other candidate because we just don't know. Because I'm from Pennsylvania, I think Josh Shapiro is an exciting option to be her vice president. He's a great leader and has shown an openness to progressive policies. Less than 24 hours after Joe Biden announced he was abandoning his re-election bid, the path for Vice President Kamala Harris to secure the Democratic presidential nomination is clearing. That may end up being the easy part. The most formidable challenge defeating Republican nominee Donald Trump in November is still to come. Her elevation to the top of ticket would bring new strengths for the Democrats, but it also exposes weaknesses that were less of a concern with Mr. Biden. According to recent polls, Ms. Harris trails the former president slightly, a roughly similar position to the one Mr. Biden found himself in before his historic announcement. But there may be more room for those numbers to shift as we move from a hypothetical matchup to a very real one. For at least a moment, Democrats have a jolt of energy after more than 3 weeks of intense hand-wringing over the president's fitness and ability to sustain his campaign. All of Ms. Harris's leading potential rivals for the nomination have endorsed her, as has former Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, who remains one of the most influential players in Democratic politics. This is, still, shaping up to be a tight race in November, a condition that reflects deep partisan trenches in American politics and the distaste many voters have for Trump as a candidate. The vice president's primary challenge and opportunity will be to capitalize on this Trump aversion, attract centrist voters in key swing states, and energize the Democratic base, which was in the past few weeks swinging towards despair, to match the enthusiasm many on the right hold for the former president. A reset. This renewed sense of Democratic presidential enthusiasm comes with a dollar sign attached. According to the Harris campaign, the vice president raised more than $80 million, £62 million, in new donations in the 24 hours since Mr. Biden's announcement, the biggest one-day total of any candidate this election cycle. That, along with the nearly $100 million she inherits from the Biden-Harris fundraising coffers, gives her a firm financial footing for the campaign to come. Ms. Harris, if she becomes the nominee, also diffuses one of the most effective attacks the Republicans have leveled against their opponent, his age. For months, the Trump campaign has been pounding Mr. Biden for being feeble and easily confused, characterizations that were reinforced for many Americans after the president's halting debate performance 4 weeks ago. The vice president, at age 59, will be a more energetic campaigner and able to make a more coherent case for her party. She could also turn the 78-year-old Trump's age against him, as he would become the oldest person ever elected president. Ms. Harris may also be able to shore up support from black voters, who polls indicate had been drifting away from Mr. Biden in recent months. If she can combine that with more backing from other minorities and younger voters, Barack Obama's winning coalition from 2008 and 2012, it could help her gain ground against Trump in the handful of swing states that will decide this year's election. Her background as a prosecutor could also burnish tough-on-crime credentials, while her law enforcement resume was a liability when she ran for the Democratic presidential nomination in 2019 and led to derisive "Kamala is a cop" attacks from the left. It could help her in a campaign against Trump. The vice president has also been the administration's point person on abortion, which has proven to be one of the most potent issues for motivating the Democratic base in recent elections. Mr. Biden, by contrast, sometimes had been a reluctant advocate on the issue, hampered by a past record of supporting some limits on the procedure. I think she reminds suburban women across the country, particularly in those battleground states, of what's at stake with reproductive rights. Former New York Congressman Steve Israel. who headed the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, told the BBC's America's podcast. "We have established a fundamental reset in the campaign." Harris's vulnerabilities. For all Harris's potential strengths, there is a reason why some Democrats were initially reluctant to push Mr. Biden to step aside, given that his running mate would be the clear successor. Despite generating Democratic enthusiasm on the subject of abortion, Ms. Harris's record as vice president has been mixed. Early in the administration, she was set the task of addressing the root causes of the migration crisis at the US-Mexico border. A number of missteps and misstatements damaged her standing and opened her to conservative attacks. Republicans are already condemning her as the president's border czar, attempting to make her the face of what public opinion polls have found is the Biden administration's unpopular immigration policies. "Immigration is a soft spot for Democrats in those battleground areas," Mr. Israel said. "This is a very salient issue for voters living in those suburbs, fairly or unfairly. They believe that our immigration system is not managed strongly enough." The Trump campaign will also try to turn the vice president's prosecutorial background against her, both by highlighting the former president's record of enacting criminal justice reform and by attacking her past prosecutorial and parole decisions. Another Harris vulnerability is her checkered track record as a candidate. In her 2016 Senate bid, she faced only token opposition from Republicans in deeply Democratic California. Her one solo run for national office, a bid for the 2020 Democratic presidential nomination, ended in ruins. While she surged early, a combination of fumbled interviews, a lack of clearly defined vision, and a poorly managed campaign led her to drop out before even the earliest primary contests. First impressions. Perhaps the biggest challenge for Ms. Harris is that, unlike the president, she is not the incumbent. While she might have the opportunity to distance herself from some of the more unpopular elements of Mr. Biden's record, she also does not have the luxury of being a known quantity for voters. Expect a furious effort by Republicans to paint Ms. Harris as too untested and too risky to be president. In effect, Trump now has a greater claim to being the only proven commodity. The vice president has a chance in the days ahead to make a new first impression with the American public. If she stumbles out of the gate, it could open the door to an extended power struggle that stretches into the Democrats' national convention in late August. They could end up with the party uniting behind a different candidate or tearing itself apart. As the past 4 weeks have shown, fortunes in the White House race can shift quickly and permanently. Ms. Harris has punched her ticket to the biggest stage in American politics. Now she has to show she can compete. Share your feedback. Subscribe our channel.